Okay, what we're going to be doing in this first big section, and a lot of this particular class actually, is focusing on 18th century counterpoint. Now, what this is the best way to think about it is as another species of counterpoint. Um, it's a variation of kind of elements of all the different species we've learned. So there are not strict new rules other than a few little things, but there are kind of elements of each one. And really, you can think of this as like this is what happened when, a composer sat down with a textbook, learned all the rules, and then started using them. They started using them to write, hymns and patriotic songs and things like that. And they said, these rules are cool, but boring, kind of. So I'm going to kind of change some stuff up and make it sound good and interesting. So they started doing a couple things that gave it a little more flair, so to speak. And we call that 18th century style because that's primarily when it popped up. So let's talk about a couple of the things that we're going to find that are differences, kind of the big picture things to start. We still do a lot of note to note counterpoint. So for every, one note in the cantus firmus, the counterpoint has one note or two notes or three notes. However, the cantus firmus, let's continue to call it a cantus firmus for just another minute, and then we're going to change that word. But the cantus firmus is not strict whole notes. It's typically half notes or even quarter notes. So the rhythms of the counterpoint change up a little bit, kind of like fifth species counterpoint or free counterpoint that we saw before. So we don't have that strict note to note movement because the movement of the rhythmic movement is kind of shifting around often. The intervals that we use, the same rules still apply for consonants and dissonance, stepwise motion, all those rules still apply, except composers are going to be using more seventh chords here. And what that means is that our definition of consonant and dissonant is going to change a little bit. Because a seventh chord is primarily a consonant chord, even though it has some dissonances in it. And by using a seventh chord in these pieces, it gives the piece more forward momentum. I think that's one of the things that composers were trying to get away from, is that in traditional counterpoint, things don't push forward like they do in a song, not till the very end. At the very end of those counterpoint examples we looked at, it felt like there was a good, like, okay, that's the end. But in the middle of it, it didn't feel like it was pushing anywhere, They just kind of spin around in circles in a way. And what composers really tried to do with this in this 18th century style is make the whole piece of music feel like it was heading in a direction, like it was moving forward, leading towards the end. So seventh chords help with that. The last big thing we're going to see is this idea of a cantus firmus is going to start turning into what we now think of as just a bass line. The bass line is what holds down the chord. It gives us usually the root, but it doesn't have to be, of the chord. And you can think of it a lot more like how the bass line of a pop song works. So it becomes less of a cantus firmus and more of a bass line, with the counterpoint on top being more of a melody line, right? So we're going to kind of see that evolve from more traditional, like two notes against each other, evolve into something more like a song, where the cantus firmus becomes something like a bass line and the counterpoint becomes something like a melody. So keep an eye out for that, like kind of the transformation of that. It's kind of interesting to see how it kind of parallels with a song. Like it's turning into a song, I guess. But as of like 200 or 300 years ago. So that's kind of the main difference. I like to think of this 18th century as kind of an in between moment before we get to actual like songs, but after Counterpoint. So we're going to kind of see in this section how we get to more song like stuff. But we are going to see melodies coming out. We are going to see voices coming out. We're going to see people singing in this section a lot. So, that being said, that's kind of our big overview. So let's move on now and just kind of dive in.